My name is Rebecca. I'm 32 years old, and I'm standing in a courtroom watching my parents' smug faces as they prepare to take everything I own. My mother whispers to her lawyer about finally getting what's rightfully theirs, while my father adjusts his expensive suit with the confidence of a man who's already won. But they don't know about the manila folder in my hands. They raised me to document everything to keep meticulous records. Today, they'd learn why that was their biggest mistake. Before I continue this story, I want to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members who only see you as a bank account, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up to family betrayal. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless because sometimes the very lessons our parents teach us become the weapons that defeat them. 3 months before that courtroom showdown, I drove to my childhood home in Connecticut for my mother Dorothy's 58th birthday. The spring air was crisp, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked from the outside, the perfect suburban house with its manicured lawn hiding the rot within. I'd brought her favorite chocolate cake from the bakery she loved, trying once again to bridge the gap that had grown between us since Grandma Evelyn's death 6 months earlier. I let myself in with my old key, calling out that I'd arrived early to help set up for the party. The house was quiet, but I heard voices coming from my father's study down the hall. As I approached with the cake box in my hands, I heard my brother-in-law Drake's voice, and something in his tone made me pause outside the partially open door. "The paperwork is almost ready," Drake was saying in his lawyer voice, the one he used when he was planning something particularly nasty. "We just need to establish a clear pattern of financial exploitation. The fact that she received the entire inheritance while you two got nothing is our strongest argument." My mother's voice cut in sharp and bitter. "She owes us everything? Do you know how much we spent raising that ungrateful child? Every dance lesson, every meal, every piece of clothing on her back. I have receipts going back 32 years. William insisted we keep everything, and now it's finally going to pay off." My father, William, cleared his throat, that sound he always made before saying something he thought was particularly clever. "I've calculated it all out. Between basic living expenses, education costs, and what I call opportunity losses from having to raise a child instead of focusing on our investments, she owes us at least $1.8 million. That inheritance from my mother should have been ours. And don't forget the emotional damages," Drake added, and I could hear papers shuffling. The stress of raising a difficult child, the therapy Dorothy needed, the marriage counseling. It all adds up. "I'm suggesting we file within the month. She won't see it coming, and by the time she can mount any defense, we'll have frozen her assets." My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the cake. I fumbled for my phone, quickly opening the recording app as my mother continued. "I want that house. My mother-in-law had no right to leave it to Rebecca instead of her own son. In that trust fund, we sacrificed everything for that girl. Every vacation we couldn't take, every luxury we had to forgo. The beauty is," Drake said with satisfaction I could hear through the door, "she's always been too trusting. She won't expect her own parents to document every penny spent on her since birth. But you have, haven't you, William? Every doctor's visit, every school supply, even her birthday presents." "Of course," my father replied proudly. "I have spreadsheets dating back to the hospital bills from her birth. Adjusted for inflation and reasonable interest, the numbers are staggering. No judge will side with her once they see how much we've invested in her life." "And we'll say she manipulated Grandma Evelyn," my mother added. "That she poisoned her against us, isolated her in those final months. Elder abuse is a serious accusation." I pressed myself against the wall, recording every word while my heart shattered into pieces. These weren't parents discussing a wayward child. They were predators planning to devour their own daughter. The cake box trembled in my free hand as Drake outlined their strategy. "I'll file the papers next week. We'll have her served at her workplace for maximum embarrassment. The shock alone will make her more likely to settle. Most people cave when their own parents sue them. It's the shame factor." "She was always too sensitive," my mother agreed. "Remember how she used to cry when we told her she was expensive? This will destroy her. She'll hand over everything just to make it stop." I heard chairs scraping and quickly backed away from the door, ducking into the bathroom as they emerged from the study. My hands shook as I saved the recording and texted my friend Jasmine. "Emergency. Need to see you tonight. Bring wine and your calculator." The rest of that visit was torture. I had to sit through dinner, pretending everything was normal, while my parents smiled and asked about my job, my life probably calculating how much more they could extract from me. When my mother hugged me goodbye, all I could think was how Judas kissed Jesus before the betrayal. Driving home, Grandma Evelyn's last words echoed in my mind. "Your parents see dollar signs, not daughters, sweetheart. I'm leaving everything to you because they would sell my memories for profit. Be careful. When money's involved, even blood turns to water. I'd thought she was being dramatic, the way elderly people sometimes are about family grudges. Now I understood she'd been trying to warn me. My entire life had been a ledger to them, every moment of care, just an entry in their account books, waiting to be collected with interest. That night, while Jasmine set up her laptop at my kitchen table, I found myself traveling back through memories I'd tried so hard to reframe as normal. The truth was, my parents' obsession with money had poisoned every aspect of my childhood, but like most children, I'd made excuses for them. Now, with their planned betrayal ringing in my ears, I could finally see the pattern clearly. My father, William, had always been a successful banker, the kind who wore three-piece suits even on weekends, and referred to his children as investments. He'd grown up poor, which he never let anyone forget, and seemed to believe that accumulating wealth would somehow erase his impoverished beginnings. My mother, Dorothy, came from middle-class comfort but had dreams of country clubs and charity galas. She'd married my father not for love, but for the promise of upward mobility, and she never quite forgave him when that mobility plateaued at upper middle class instead of reaching the heights she'd imagined. "Remember when you got that commercial job when you were 8? Jasmine asked, pulling me from my reverie. "The cereal commercial, you were so excited about having your own money." I laughed bitterly. $67,000 over 3 years of child acting. Want to know how much of that I saw? Zero. They said they were putting it in a college fund. Turns out they used it to renovate the kitchen and take that cruise to Europe. Without me, of course. I stayed with Grandma Evelyn while they spent my money on themselves. Jasmine's fingers flew over her keyboard. "We'll need documentation of that. Do you have the contracts?" "I have everything," I said, opening the filing cabinet I'd inherited from Grandma Evelyn. She taught me to keep records of everything. I think she knew this day would come. As we went through folder after folder, the full picture of my parents' financial abuse emerged like a photograph developing in slow motion. There were the savings bonds from relatives' birthday and Christmas money that mysteriously vanished into my parents' safekeeping. The paper route money I'd earned at 12 deposited directly into their account to teach me responsibility. The babysitting money from ages 13 to 16 that they claimed was contributing to household expenses, while they drove new cars and I wore thrift store clothes. "Look at this," Jasmine said, holding up a credit card statement. "This is in your name, but you would have been 18 when it was opened, still in high school." I studied the statement, my stomach turning. I never had a credit card until I was 25. They must have used my social security number. The charges were all theirs: golf club memberships, expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been allowed to visit, online shopping sprees, while they told me we couldn't afford new school shoes. "This is fraud," Jasmine said flatly. "Federal offense level fraud. How much debt did they rack up in your name?" We kept digging. By dawn, we'd uncovered over $240,000 they'd stolen from me over the years, not counting the credit fraud. Every time I'd wondered why I struggled financially despite working multiple jobs through college, here was the answer. They'd been draining me dry since birth. "Tell me about your grandmother," Jasmine said gently as we took a break, the sunrise painting my kitchen gold. "She seemed to be the only one who really loved you." Tears pricked my eyes. "Grandma Evelyn was everything my parents weren't. Warm, generous, actually interested in me as a person rather than a financial asset. She used to sneak me money for small things like ice cream or books, always with a wink and a promise not to tell my parents. I think she knew they'd take it otherwise. She'd tried to make up for their coldness with her warmth. While my parents calculated the cost of my existence, Grandma Evelyn celebrated it. She came to every school play they missed, every birthday they forgot because they were working. She taught me to cook in her kitchen, sharing stories of her own childhood and the dreams she'd had. When she got sick, I continued, voice thick with grief. My parents suddenly became very interested in her care. They wanted power of attorney access to her accounts. She refused, said she'd rather trust a stranger off the street than her own son with her money. They were furious. The last 6 months of Grandma Evelyn's life had been a battlefield. My parents tried everything to get control of her assets. They accused me of elder abuse when I moved in to care for her. They called Adult Protective Services, claiming I was isolating her. They even tried to have her declared mentally incompetent. But she was sharp until the end, I said, smiling through tears. She made sure everything was ironclad. The will, the trust, the house deed. She knew they'd come after it all, so she made it as litigation-proof as possible. What she didn't anticipate was them coming after me for the crime of being born. Jasmine squeezed my hand. "We're going to bury them with their own greed, Rebecca. Every receipt they kept, every record they maintained to build their case against you. It's going to prove what they really are. As the morning progressed, we found more evidence. The college loans they'd pressured me to take out, promising to help pay them back, then never contributing a cent. The car they'd bought for me, but kept in their name, selling it the moment I graduated, and keeping the money. The life insurance policy they'd taken out on me with themselves as beneficiaries. No wonder they're furious about the inheritance, Jasmine observed. You were supposed to be their retirement plan. Every penny they spent on you was an investment they expected to collect on with interest. When Grandma Evelyn left everything to you, instead of them, it ruined their whole scheme. She was right. In their minds, I wasn't their daughter. I was a 32-year annuity that had suddenly stopped paying out. The inheritance and house Grandma left me weren't gifts in their eyes. They were stolen goods money that should have flowed to them as returns on their parental investment. You know what the saddest part is? I said, looking at the piles of evidence around us. I would have helped them if they'd just asked. If they'd come to me with love instead of lawsuits, I would have shared everything. But they don't see me as family. They see me as a debt to be collected. Then we'll give them exactly what they deserve, Jasmine said firmly. Nothing but the truth about who they really are. Over the next 3 weeks, Jasmine and I transformed my dining room into a war room. Every surface was covered with documents, receipts, and evidence of my parents' decades-long financial abuse. We worked late into the nights, fueled by coffee and righteous anger, building a defense that would turn their own meticulous record-keeping against them. I've never seen anything like this, Jasmine muttered one evening, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed another spreadsheet. Your father documented everything except his actual love for you. Look at this February 14th, 1999, Valentine's Day card for school party, $3.50. Emotional labor surcharge, $25. He charged you for emotional labor on Valentine's Day. You were 7. I laughed despite myself. It was either that or cry. Wait until you see the Christmas calculations. Apparently, the joy on my face when opening presents was worth $50 per gift in parental satisfaction fees. We'd hired a forensic accountant to review everything, and even he'd been shocked. In 30 years of this work, he'd said, I've never seen parents treat their child like a profit center. They've essentially been embezzling from you since birth. The evidence was damning. My child acting earnings of $67,000 had been deposited into accounts bearing my name, but controlled by my parents. They'd forged my signature on the endorsements. I was too young to write my own name properly. The money had been spent within months on home renovations, vacations, and my father's golf club membership. Here's another interesting discovery, Jasmine announced, waving a folder. Remember those savings bonds your relatives gave you for birthdays and holidays? Your parents cashed them all the day you turned 18. Forged your signature again. That's another $15,000. Then there was the credit card fraud. They'd opened multiple cards in my name during my college years, maxing them out and making only minimum payments. By the time I graduated, I had $40,000 in debt I didn't know existed, which explained why I couldn't get approved for a car loan despite having a good job. How did I not know about this? I asked, staring at the credit reports. Because they had the statements sent to their address, Jasmine explained, and they made just enough payments to keep the accounts from going to collections where you'd be notified. They literally managed your debt to keep you ignorant of it. The more we dug, the worse it got. They'd claimed me as a dependent on their taxes until I was 28, collecting credits and deductions while I struggled to make ends meet. They'd even applied for pandemic relief loans in my name, pocketing the money while I worked frontline during the crisis. We need witnesses, Jasmine decided. People who saw how they treated you versus how they lived. That's when I reached out to Stella, my former nanny. She'd worked for our family when I was young, and I'd always wondered why she left so suddenly when I was 10. Now in her 70s, she was more than willing to talk. Oh, honey, she said when we met at a small cafe. I've carried guilt about leaving you for over 20 years. But I couldn't stand watching it anymore. Your parents spent more on their monthly wine budget than they did on your clothes and food combined. I used to sneak you extra portions because they had you on a cost-effective meal plan while they ate steak. She told us about the Christmas when my parents bought themselves matching Rolexes while giving me dollar store toys. The birthday parties they threw for appearances but charged back to my account. The time they left me with a fever of 103 because taking me to the doctor would cost too much while they got weekly spa treatments. I started documenting things, Stella admitted, sliding a worn notebook across the table. I thought maybe someday someone would need to know the truth. I never imagined they'd actually sue you for being born. Her notes were detailed and heartbreaking. Dates when I was left alone while they vacationed. Money given by relatives that never reached me. The designer clothes my mother bought while I wore the same shoes until they fell apart. the stark difference between their luxurious master bedroom and my sparse room with a mattress on the floor. Uncle Pete, my father's estranged brother, was our next ally. He'd cut contact with the family 15 years ago, but when I explained the situation, he immediately agreed to help. "Your father has always been a piece of work," he said bluntly when we met. "But suing his own daughter? That's low even for William. Let me tell you about the family business he claims I cheated him out of." According to Pete, my father had tried to sue him too, claiming Pete owed him for emotional support during their father's death. The pattern was clear in William's mind. Every relationship was transactional, every interaction billable. He used to joke that children were the best investment, Pete recalled. "Said the government pays you to have them, then they pay you back for raising them." I thought he was joking. Guess not. Pete provided us with emails and letters from my father over the years, each one demonstrating his transactional view of family. In one, he'd calculated how much Pete owed him for being the older brother. In another, he'd invoiced their mother for driving her to chemotherapy appointments. As we built our case, I discovered something else: community. Word had gotten out about my situation, and suddenly people I hadn't heard from in years were reaching out. Teachers who'd noticed my shabby clothes while my parents drove luxury cars. Neighbors who'd wondered why I was always at Grandma Evelyn's house. Friends' parents who'd quietly paid for my participation in school activities because they knew my parents wouldn't. "Your 10th grade English teacher wants to testify," Jasmine informed me one afternoon. "Apparently, your mother tried to get her to change your grade from an A to a B because, quote, Rebecca doesn't need perfect grades for the state school she'll be attending." Each witness, each piece of evidence, painted the same picture. Parents who viewed their child not as a person to love, but as an investment to monetize. They'd kept meticulous records, all right, but those records told a story they never intended, one of systematic financial and emotional abuse disguised as parenting. "You know what's really sick?" I said to Jasmine as we organized everything for my lawyer. "They probably think they were good parents because they kept me fed and housed. In their accounting, that makes them creditors, not abusers." "Well," Jasmine replied grimly, "they're about to learn that some debts can't be collected and some investments come with unexpected returns." As the court date approached, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Part of me still couldn't believe my parents were actually going through with this. The child in me kept hoping they'd realize how monstrous their actions were and withdraw the suit. But the adult who'd reviewed all the evidence knew better. To them, I wasn't their daughter. I was an unpaid invoice, 32 years overdue, and they intended to collect every penny. If I thought my parents would maintain any pretense of civility before the trial, I was quickly proven wrong. Once they realized I wasn't going to roll over and hand them my inheritance, they launched what can only be described as a scorched earth campaign to destroy my life. It started with social media. My mother, who had previously posted maybe once a year, suddenly became prolific on Facebook. "Pray for our family," her first post read. "Discovering your child has been lying to you for years is heartbreaking. Mental illness runs in families, and we're devastated to see it manifesting in Rebecca." Within hours, concerned relatives were calling me. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from cousins, aunts, and family friends asking if I was okay, if I was getting help. The narrative was clear. I was unstable, possibly dangerous, and my poor parents were victims of my delusions. My father took a different approach. He leveraged his banking connections and country club membership to spread poison through professional channels. Such a shame about William's daughter. He told anyone who would listen. "Drug problems, you know. He's tried everything to help her, but she's stolen from them repeatedly. Now she's after their retirement savings." The first real casualty was my job. I worked as a financial analyst at a respected firm, a position I'd earned through years of hard work, despite the debt my parents had secretly saddled me with. One morning, my boss called me into his office. "Rebecca Ock," he said uncomfortably, "I received a concerning call from someone claiming to be your father. He suggested you might have a substance abuse problem that could affect your work with our clients' funds." My stomach dropped. "Mr. Harrison, I can explain. My parents are trying to sue me for my inheritance, and they're spreading lies to pressure me into settling." To his credit, Mr. Harrison listened, but the damage was done. Even though he didn't believe their claims, the mere suggestion of impropriety in financial services was toxic. Within a week, I was placed on voluntary leave while the situation was resolved. The flying monkeys came next. My parents activated every relative and family friend they could manipulate. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, showed up at my workplace before I was placed on leave, causing a scene in the lobby. "How dare you abandon your parents after everything they've done for you?" she shrieked as security tried to escort her out. "They sacrificed everything. Your mother gave up her career for you." My mother had never worked a day in her life, but facts didn't matter in their narrative. The scene was witnessed by dozens of my colleagues, adding to my professional humiliation. Cousin Marie, who I'd once considered a friend, began posting old photos of family gatherings on Instagram with captions like, "Before Rebecca turned on everyone who loved her," and "Money changes people." Some of us remember when family meant more than dollar signs. The irony of that last one wasn't lost on me. They tried to isolate me from every support system I had. Friends received messages suggesting I was having a mental breakdown. My book club got an anonymous email claiming I'd stolen money from the club funds. There were no club funds. Even my gym received a call warning them that I might be unstable and dangerous. The private investigator was almost comical in his obviousness. A middle-aged man in a sedan who thought wearing different baseball caps made him invisible. He followed me to the grocery store, to Jasmine's house, to my lawyer's office. He took photos of me buying wine, probably to support their substance abuse narratives. "Let him follow," my lawyer advised. "He's documenting that you're living a normal life, not the drug-addled fantasy they're selling." But it was exhausting. Every trip outside meant checking for the PI. Every social media notification might be another attack. Every phone call could be someone else my parents had turned against me. The break-in attempt happened on a Thursday night. I was staying at Jasmine's house, thank God, when my security system alerted me to motion at Grandma Evelyn's house, my house now. The cameras showed my parents trying keys in the lock, apparently not realizing I'd changed them months ago. "She's our mother's house," I heard my father say clearly on the recording. "We have every right to be here." They tried windows next, growing increasingly frustrated when they found them all secured. Finally, they gave up, but not before my mother spat on the doorstep. "This should be ours," she said to the camera, apparently not realizing it was recording. The next morning, they tried a different approach: financial warfare. My phone rang with a call from my bank. Someone had tried to freeze my accounts, claiming fraudulent activity. Fortunately, Jasmine had advised me to move most of my money to a different bank weeks earlier, so only a small checking account was affected. "Your parents are escalating because they're desperate," my lawyer explained. "They expected you to crumble immediately. Your resistance is making them reckless." The fake heart attack was their cruelest ploy. I was at home on a Saturday, trying to relax after another week of harassment when my phone exploded with messages. "Your father's in the hospital." "Heart attack. He's asking for you." "This is your fault." For a moment, despite everything, I felt the pull of daughterly duty. What if it was real? What if he died thinking I hated him? I was halfway to my car when Jasmine called. "Don't you dare go to that hospital," she said firmly. I just called. "There's no William Chen admitted today. It's another trick." She was right. An hour later, photos surfaced on Aunt Linda's Facebook of my deathly ill father at the country club playing golf with his lawyer. The caption read, "So glad William is feeling better after his scare this morning." They hadn't even coordinated their lies properly. But the cruelest blow came from Kyle, my boyfriend of 2 years. He'd been supportive at first, holding me while I cried after discovering my parents' betrayal. But as the harassment intensified, he grew distant. "I can't do this," he said one evening, bags already packed. "The drama, the constant attacks, your family showing up at my work. It's too much, Rebecca. I didn't sign up for this." "I didn't sign up for it either," I said quietly, but he was already leaving. Later, I discovered my mother had been messaging his family, warning them about my mental instability and suggesting their son was in danger. The pressure had been too much for him to handle. Drake, my brother-in-law, saved his special touch for my birthday. We'd booked a quiet dinner at my favorite restaurant, just Jasmine, a few loyal friends, and me. A chance to forget the chaos for one evening. I should have known better. Rebecca Chen. The process server appeared just as we were toasting. "You're being served." He handed me an amended complaint in front of everyone. My parents had increased their demand to $2.3 million and added claims of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Their evidence. My refusal to acknowledge their sacrifices was causing them severe psychological harm. "Happy birthday," Drake had written in the margin of the legal documents. The bastard had actually personalized my service papers. That night, I nearly broke. Sitting in Jasmine's guest room, I'd been staying there more often, feeling unsafe in my own home. I stared at the pile of legal documents and wondered if it would be easier to just give in. Give them the house, the money, everything. Maybe then they'd leave me alone. "Don't you dare," Jasmine said, finding me at 3 a.m. with the settlement papers in my hand. "This is exactly what they want. They're terrorists, Rebecca. You don't negotiate with terrorists, especially when they share your DNA." She was right, of course. Giving in wouldn't end their harassment. It would only prove their tactics worked. They'd drain me dry and still probably sue me for not being grateful enough about it. As the trial date approached, their attacks grew more frantic. Dead animals left on my doorstep. My car tires slashed. fake Craigslist ads with my address advertising, "Free valuables door unlocked." Each incident was reported to the police, adding to our documentation of harassment. "They're showing their true colors," my lawyer said, reviewing the police reports. "Every attack they make strengthens our counter case. They're so focused on breaking you, they don't realize they're building your defense." The final straw came a week before trial. A letter arrived at Grandma Evelyn's house, addressed in her handwriting. For a moment, my heart stopped, but it was just another trick. My parents had forged her handwriting on a letter, supposedly expressing disappointment in me and wishing she'd left everything to them instead. Holding that letter, something inside me hardened into diamond. They'd crossed every line, violated every boundary. They'd tried to break me financially, professionally, socially, and emotionally. Now they were desecrating the memory of the one person who'd truly loved me. "They want a war," I said to Jasmine, crumpling the fake letter. "They've got one, and they're about to learn that keeping detailed records works both ways." The girl who'd once cried over not being loved enough was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that DNA didn't make a family, and that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is refusing to be anyone's victim, especially when that anyone shares your last name. The morning of the trial arrived with unseasonable heat for October, as if nature itself was reflecting the burning bridges between my parents and me. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, the kind that whispered, "responsible professional," rather than screaming it. Jasmine helped me with my hair, her steady hands a comfort against my nerves. "Remember," she said, applying the last pin, "you're not the one on trial here, no matter how they try to spin it. You're the victim who's about to become the victor." The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Somehow, our family drama had caught the attention of local media. "Family sues daughter for cost of raising her" had proven to be an irresistible headline. I kept my head high and my mouth shut as journalists shouted questions. My parents had already arrived, holding court on the courthouse steps like martyrs heading to their execution. My mother wore a black dress, more suitable for a funeral, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief despite the absence of actual tears. My father stood rigid in his most expensive suit, the picture of wounded, paternal dignity. "We never wanted it to come to this," he told a reporter voice heavy with practiced sorrow. "We love our daughter, but mental illness and greed have poisoned her against us. We're only asking for what we're owed after 32 years of sacrifice." They'd brought a small army, 3 lawyers in sharp suits led by Drake, who smirked when he saw me. Behind them sat their character witnesses, people they'd convinced or paid to testify against me. I recognized some faces from the country club, others from their social circle. Aunt Linda was there, of course, glaring at me like I'd personally offended her by existing. Our side was smaller but mighty. My lawyer, Janet Morrison, was a fierce advocate who'd taken the case partly because she found it so appalling. Behind us sat Jasmine, Stella, Uncle Pete, and a handful of others who'd come to support me despite the social cost of defying my parents. Judge Sandra Washington presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense reputation. I'd researched her extensively. She had little patience for frivolous lawsuits and even less for family members who weaponized the court system against each other. "This is a civil matter." She began looking over her glasses at both parties. "Chen versus Chen, a dispute over financial obligations between parents and their adult daughter. I've reviewed the briefs, and I must say, in 30 years on the bench, I've never seen anything quite like this." Drake rose first, buttoning his jacket with the confidence of a man about to perform a well-rehearsed play. "Your Honor, this case is about fundamental fairness and the obligations children have to their parents. My clients, William and Dorothy Chen, spent 32 years and considerable resources raising the defendant. They have documentation for every expense, every sacrifice, every opportunity cost. They're simply asking to be made whole." He presented their case like a PowerPoint presentation from hell. Slide after slide of expenses, each one itemized and categorized. The hospital bills from my birth, $12,000 adjusted for inflation. Monthly food costs calculated at restaurant prices rather than actual grocery bills. Housing charged at market rental rates for a private bedroom in Connecticut. "As you can see, Your Honor." Drake continued, laser pointer dancing across his charts. "The total cost of raising Rebecca Chen from birth to age 18 comes to $987. But that's just the beginning." He moved on to their opportunity costs. The promotions my father didn't pursue because he had to be home for dinner occasionally, the social events my mother missed because of school plays, the vacations they couldn't take, the investments they couldn't make, all because they had a child to raise. "We calculate the opportunity costs at an additional $500,000, Drake announced. But the real damage comes from the emotional and psychological toll. This was where their case became truly absurd. They'd actually put a price tag on love, or rather on their version of it. Each birthday was billed as emotional labor. Every Christmas morning was invoiced for mandatory joy provision. They'd calculated the cost of worrying about me during my teenage years at $50 per hour. In total, Drake concluded with a flourish, William and Dorothy Chen are owed $1.8 million plus interest and penalties for late payment, bringing the total to $2.3 million. This doesn't include the inheritance and property that rightfully should have passed to them from William's mother. Throughout his presentation, my parents sat ramrod straight, occasionally sharing satisfied glances. My mother had given up on the fake tears and now wore an expression of righteous vindication. My father took notes, probably calculating how much this very court appearance would cost me. Their character witnesses were a parade of delusion and deception. Mrs. Hamilton from the country club testified about what devoted parents they'd always been, how they'd sacrificed so much. She didn't mention that she'd only known them for 5 years and had never actually seen them with me. Dorothy gave up her entire life for that girl, she declared. She could have been anything, but she chose motherhood. My mother had never worked, never volunteered, never done anything but lunch and gossip, but in their narrative, she was a thwarted genius who'd sacrificed Nobel Prizes for PTA meetings. Another witness, a golf buddy of my father's, testified about William's dedication. He tracked every penny spent on Rebecca. Do you know how much work that is? That's love. That's a father who cared enough to document his investment in his child's future. The fact that he called me an investment apparently struck no one on their side as problematic. Then came the accusations about Grandma Evelyn. A cousin I barely knew testified that I'd isolated my grandmother, prevented family visits, manipulated a dying woman for money. She wouldn't even let us say goodbye, the cousin wept. Rebecca controlled everything, turned Evelyn against her own son. I wanted to scream that they'd never visited Grandma Evelyn when she was healthy, only showing up when they smelled inheritance. But Janet had coached me well. I sat silent, taking notes, letting them spin their web of lies. Drake called my father to the stand next. William Chen approached like a man attending his own coronation, ready to explain how the world had wronged him by expecting him to raise his child without compensation. Mr. Chen O'Drake began, "Tell us about the sacrifices you made for your daughter." My father cleared his throat, that same sound from the study when I'd overheard their planning. Everything I did was for Rebecca. Every dollar I earned, every hour I worked, it was all for her future. I kept careful records because I wanted her to understand the value of what she'd been given. And how has she repaid your devotion? By stealing her grandmother's affection and inheritance. By turning her back on the parents who gave her everything. By forcing us to come to court just to be made whole for our sacrifices. He actually managed to squeeze out a tear, this man who'd charged me for emotional labor on Valentine's Day. The worst part was listening to them rewrite history. In their telling, they'd been model parents, devoted and loving. The vacations without me became necessary respite from the demands of child-rearing. The designer clothes they bought themselves while I wore thrift store finds became teaching her the value of money. Every act of neglect was reframed as a parenting strategy, every cruelty as tough love. My mother's testimony was even more theatrical. She took the stand like a tragic heroine handkerchief clutched dramatically. "I gave up everything," she whispered into the microphone. "My career, my dreams, my body, pregnancy destroyed my figure. I could have been a model, an actress, anything. Instead, I became a mother, and this is how she repays me." She'd never had a job application, much less a career to sacrifice. Her dreams extended no further than her next Botox appointment, but she sold the performance with the conviction of someone who'd revised history so thoroughly, she believed her own lies. "Tell us about Rebecca's childhood," Drake prompted. "We gave her everything a child could want. Dance lessons, music lessons, the best schools. Do you know how much ballet costs?" And she quit after 3 years. Thousands of dollars wasted because she didn't like it anymore. She conveniently left out that she'd forced me into ballet because she'd wanted to be a dancer herself, living vicariously through me, until I dared to have my own preferences. By the time their presentation finished, they'd painted a picture of themselves as saints who'd bankrupted themselves, raising an ungrateful monster. The courtroom felt heavy with their manufactured grief and carefully calculated victimhood. Judge Washington had maintained a poker face, throughout occasionally making notes. But I caught her eyebrows rising several times, particularly when they'd presented the bill for emotional labor and mandatory joy provision. "Does the defense wish to cross-examine?" she asked. Janet stood slowly, a predator who'd been patiently waiting to strike. "Oh, yes, Your Honor. We very much wish to cross-examine. But first, might I suggest a brief recess? I believe everyone could use a moment to digest what we've just heard." The judge's lips twitched in what might have been suppressed amusement. 15-minute recess granted. As we filed out, my parents and their legal team were all smiles and confidence. They thought they'd made their case, thought the judge would be swayed by their meticulous documentation and emotional manipulation. Slam dunk, I heard Drake tell them. No judge can ignore that level of detail. We've got her. If only they knew what was coming. All their careful record-keeping, all their documented expenses and sacrifices, every receipt they'd saved to build their case against me, it was all about to become evidence for the prosecution. They'd built their own pyre, and Janet was about to light the match. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. My parents still wore their masks of wounded dignity, but there was a glimmer of uncertainty in their eyes. They'd expected me to cower, to offer no defense beyond emotional pleading. The stack of boxes my legal team wheeled in clearly wasn't part of their plan. Janet Morrison stood with the casual confidence of someone holding a royal flush. Your Honor, we've heard extensive testimony about my client's parents' meticulous record-keeping. We'd like to present our own documentation compiled from those very same records, along with additional evidence that paints a very different picture of the Chen family dynamics. Proceed, Judge Washington said, leaning forward with interest. First, I'd like to submit into evidence Rebecca Chen's financial records from birth to present. Like her parents, she learned to document everything. Unlike them, she documented reality, not fantasy. Janet handed a thick folder to the bailiff. Your Honor, I'd like the court to hear a summary of what Rebecca's parents actually took from her over the years, starting from her earliest childhood. The bailiff, a stern man in his 50s who'd probably seen everything in his career, began reading in a monotone voice that somehow made the words more damaging. Age 5. Birthday money from maternal grandmother, $25, deposited into parents' account. Age 6. Christmas money from various relatives, total $150, held for safekeeping, never returned. Age 7. Lemonade, stand earnings, $37.50 confiscated for family expenses. My mother's face had gone pale. This wasn't how their narrative was supposed to go. The bailiff continued his voice, never wavering. Age 8 through 11, child acting and modeling earnings from cereal commercials, toy advertisements, and catalog work. Total earnings, $67,400, deposited into custodial account withdrawn by parents for kitchen renovation and European vacation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The reporters were scribbling furiously. Age 12 through 16, babysitting earnings, newspaper route income, summer job wages. Total $8,300, all deposited directly into parents' accounts. Drake was on his feet? Objection, Your Honor. These were household contributions normal for any family. Overruled, Judge Washington said sharply. Continue, bailiff. Age 16, savings bonds, gifted by relatives from birth to 16th birthday, cashed without Rebecca's knowledge or consent. Total value, $15,000. Age 18 through 22. Credit cards opened using Rebecca's social security number without her knowledge. Total debt accumulated $42,000. My father's confident posture had crumbled. He was whispering frantically to Drake, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Tax fraud, years 2012 through 2020, parents claimed Rebecca as dependent, while she was self-supporting, collecting credits and deductions totaling $18,000. Pandemic relief loans taken in Rebecca's name 2020 and 2021, $30,000 deposited into parents' accounts. The bailiff paused, cleared his throat, and delivered the killing blow. Total amount stolen from Rebecca Chen by her parents, $243,671.50. The silence was deafening. Even the court reporter had paused, staring at my parents with undisguised shock. But we're not done, Your Honor, Janet said quietly. The financial abuse was only part of the picture. We have here a detailed record of neglect compiled from witness statements, medical records, and the parents' own documentation. She handed another folder to the bailiff, who began reading again each word, a nail in my parents' coffin. Age 7, left alone overnight while parents attended wine tasting weekend. Neighbor Stella Morgan provided care. Age 9. No medical treatment for strep throat for 2 weeks. Parents were on spa retreat. Infection became serious enough to require hospitalization. Age 10 through 13. 15 documented instances of Rebecca going without meals while parents dined at restaurants. Evidence credit card statements showing restaurant charges while Rebecca's diary entries describe hunger. My mother had given up all pretense of composure. She was clutching my father's arm, her carefully applied makeup running in streaks down her face. These weren't fake tears anymore. Age 14. Rebecca required to work part-time to buy own school supplies, while parents purchased matching Rolex watches. Age 15. No winter coat for 2 months during record cold snap. Parents' credit card statements show purchase of fur coat for Dorothy Chen, same period. Age 16. Rebecca's college fund, promised since birth, revealed to be non-existent. Parents had spent the money allocated for it on country club membership and golf lessons. Drake tried once more to object something about relevance, but Judge Washington shut him down with a look that could have frozen fire. Janet took over from the bailiff, her voice filled with controlled fury. Your Honor, the prosecution has presented Rebecca as an ungrateful daughter who owes her parents for the basic care they provided. What we've shown is that they provided the bare minimum while enriching themselves with money that rightfully belonged to her. They've stolen her childhood earnings, destroyed her credit, committed tax fraud in her name, and now have the audacity to sue her for the privilege of being their victim. She pulled out a final document. I have here a report from our forensic accountant. If we were to calculate what Rebecca's parents actually owe her, including stolen wages, fraudulent debt interest, and damages for credit destruction, the total would be over $400,000, and that's being conservative. The courtroom erupted. My parents' carefully selected witnesses were whispering among themselves, some looking horrified, others trying to distance themselves from the toxic couple they'd supported. The reporters were practically vibrating with excitement at the story unfolding before them. Order combat, Judge Washington commanded, and the room fell silent. She looked at my parents with an expression I can only describe as disgusted fascination. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, do you have any response to these allegations? My father stood on shaky legs. For the first time in my life, he looked old. Your Honor, these are misunderstandings. We were teaching her financial responsibility. Everything we did was for her own good. By stealing her money and destroying her credit, the judge asked, her voice dangerously quiet. We were holding it for her, my mother interjected desperately. We were going to give it all back when she was ready. She's 32 years old, Judge Washington observed dryly. When exactly were you planning to determine she was ready to have her own money? Drake tried to salvage something from the wreckage. Your Honor, even if some financial irregularities occurred, it doesn't negate the fundamental costs of raising a child. My client still incurred significant expenses. Janet smiled, and it was terrifying. Actually, Your Honor, we've analyzed those expenses too. Would you like to hear what they actually spent on Rebecca versus what they claimed? At the judge's nod, Janet continued. They claimed food costs of $500 per month for Rebecca. Actual grocery receipts show they spent less than $100 per month on her food, while spending $600 per month at restaurants where she wasn't included. They claimed housing costs at market rate for her bedroom. She actually slept on a mattress on the floor until age 16, when her grandmother bought her a bed. They claimed designer clothing expenses. Rebecca's clothes came from thrift stores and charity donations, while her mother's closet contained over $100,000 in designer items. The final blow came when Janet introduced Stella's testimony directly. Our former nanny took the stand with quiet dignity, her notebook in hand. I worked for the Chen family for 7 years, she said, voice steady, despite her obvious emotion. I watched them spend more on wine than on their daughter's food. I saw them leave for vacations while Rebecca had the flu. I bought her school supplies with my own money because they wouldn't. That child raised herself while they counted every penny they grudgingly spent on keeping her alive. She looked directly at my parents. You want to know what you spent raising Rebecca? As little as possible. You want to know what she owes you? Nothing. You owe her a childhood, but since you can't give that back, the least you could do is stop trying to steal her future too. When Stella stepped down, the courtroom was silent except for my mother's very real sobs. The woman who'd faked tears for sympathy was finally crying genuine ones, but they were tears of rage and humiliation, not remorse. Judge Washington looked at the pile of evidence before her, then at my parents, then at me. I've seen enough for today. Court will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments and my decision. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I suggest you use the time to reconsider your position, and perhaps to contact criminal defense attorneys. The evidence presented today will be forwarded to the district attorney's office for a review of potential fraud charges. As we filed out, my parents' supporters melted away like snow in spring. Even Aunt Linda couldn't meet their eyes. The reporters surged forward, but my parents had nothing to say now. Their carefully constructed narrative had collapsed, buried under the weight of their own greed and meticulous documentation. Drake grabbed his briefcase and fled without a word to his clients. The 3 lawyers who'd seemed so imposing that morning now looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. They'd been party to a grotesque abuse of the legal system, and everyone knew it. In the hallway, Janet squeezed my hand. Tomorrow we finish this, They wanted an accounting of what you owe them. They're about to get an education in what justice actually costs. I looked back at my parents one last time. They sat alone in the emptying courtroom, two con artists whose longest con had finally been exposed. They'd raised me to document everything, taught me to keep records, insisted on receipts for every transaction. In the end, their greatest gift to me was teaching me how to destroy them with their own weapons. The bailiff's voice still echoed in my mind. $243,671.50. The price of my childhood, itemized an invoice. But tomorrow they'd learn the real cost of trying to collect on a debt that should never have existed. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather had finally caught up to the mood of the trial. I arrived early, needing a moment in the quiet courtroom before the final act of our family tragedy played out. Janet found me there, staring at the empty judge's bench. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm ready for this to be over," I admitted. "Win or lose, I just want to stop being their daughter in any way that matters. After today, you will be," she promised. They made sure of that themselves. The courtroom filled quickly. Word had spread overnight, and what had started as a local curiosity had become national news. Parents sue daughter for cost of raising her daughter, countersues for theft, had gone viral. The gallery was packed with journalists, legal observers, and curious citizens who couldn't believe such a case existed. My parents arrived looking haggard. Gone were the designer suits and careful styling. My father's hair was uncombed, my mother's makeup hastily applied. They'd spent the night watching their reputation crumble in real time as news outlets picked up the story. Their country club had already issued a statement distancing themselves from the couple. Drake was nowhere to be seen. In his place sat a harried-looking public defender who'd clearly been assigned at the last minute. Even their paid legal team had abandoned them. Judge Washington entered with a gravity that made everyone instinctively rise higher. She settled into her chair and looked at both parties with an expression I'd seen my grandmother wear when deeply disappointed in humanity. Before we proceed to closing arguments, she began, "I want to make something clear. In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen such a grotesque perversion of parental responsibility. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, you have taken what should be the most sacred relationship that between parent and child and reduced it to a balance sheet." My mother started to speak, but the judge raised a hand that brooked no argument. "You will have your chance to speak. First, I want to address the evidence presented yesterday. I've reviewed it thoroughly, along with applicable law. What I found was not just financial abuse, but a pattern of criminal behavior that spans decades." She pulled out a paper and began reading. "Credit fraud, identity theft, tax fraud, embezzlement of a minor's earnings, forgery, and theft by deception. These are not civil matters, ladies and gentlemen. These are crimes. Crimes committed by parents against their own child." My father's new lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, probably explaining just how much trouble they were in. "Now," Judge Washington continued, "let's address your lawsuit. You claim your daughter owes you $2.3 million for raising her. Let me be very clear. Parents have a legal and moral obligation to provide for their children. It's not a loan. It's not an investment. It's the bare minimum required of anyone who chooses to bring a life into this world." She looked directly at my parents. "Even if I were to accept your obscene premise that children owe their parents for basic care, your own evidence undermines you. You documented spending far less on your daughter than you claimed while simultaneously stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from her. You cannot claim she owes you for a childhood you barely provided while robbing her of the means to succeed despite your neglect." Janet stood for our closing argument. She was brief but devastating. "Your Honor, Rebecca Chen is not here seeking revenge. She's here because her parents forced her to defend herself against their greed. They've shown no remorse, no recognition that what they did was wrong. They still believe she owes them for the privilege of surviving their parenting. We ask not just that you dismiss their case with prejudice, but that you grant our countersuit for damages. Rebecca deserves justice for what was stolen from her and protection from future harassment by the people who should have protected her." The public defender made a valiant effort, but what could he say? That stealing from your child was acceptable if you kept good records, that fraud was fine if you called it parenting. He mumbled something about misunderstandings and family reconciliation before sitting down looking relieved to be done. Judge Washington didn't even pause to deliberate. "I'm ready to rule. In the matter of Chen versus Chen, I find in favor of the defendant, Rebecca Chen. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. They are barred from ever bringing such a claim against their daughter again." My mother let out a wail that would have been tragic if it weren't so theatrical. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "in the matter of the countersuit, I find in favor of Rebecca Chen." The plaintiffs William and Dorothy Chen are ordered to pay damages in the amount of $400,000, representing the money stolen from their daughter plus interest and damages for credit destruction. "We don't have that kind of money," my father protested. "Then you'll liquidate assets," the judge said coldly. "The same way you expected your daughter to do to pay your fraudulent claim. Additionally, a permanent restraining order is granted. You are to have no contact with Rebecca Chen directly or through third parties. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." She wasn't done. "I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. I'm also reporting you to the IRS for tax fraud. And Mr. Chen, given your position in banking, I'm forwarding this to financial regulatory authorities. I doubt you'll be working in finance again." The gavel came down like thunder. "Court is adjourned. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, I suggest you leave through the back exit. There's quite a media presence waiting for you outside." My parents sat stunned as the courtroom erupted around them. Their supporters had long since fled. Their scheme had not only failed, but had destroyed everything they'd built their identity on: their reputation, their financial security, their social standing. All for the chance to squeeze more money from the daughter they'd already robbed blind. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Janet and I had prepared a statement, but I found myself speaking from the heart instead. "I want people to understand something," I said, looking directly into the cameras. "This isn't about money. It's about the difference between parents and predators. Real parents give without keeping score. They love without sending invoices. What my parents did to me happens to thousands of adult children whose families see them as ATMs rather than human beings. Financial abuse doesn't end at 18. Sometimes it's just beginning." The response was overwhelming. Within hours, my inbox was flooded with messages from others who'd experienced similar abuse. Adult children whose parents had stolen their identities, drained their accounts, demanded repayment for childhood. I wasn't alone, had never been alone in this struggle. 6 months later, I sat in Grandma Evelyn's house, my house, reading a letter from the district attorney. My parents had been convicted of multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. They'd avoided jail time due to their age and first offender status, but were on probation and had been ordered to pay restitution. The country club had revoked their membership. My father had lost his banking license. They'd had to sell their house to pay legal fees and my settlement. Uncle Pete visited regularly, now freed from years of estrangement from his brother. "You did what I never had the courage to do," he told me. "You held him accountable. Mom would be proud." Stella had become like family, joining us for Sunday dinners, where conversation never included calculations of emotional labor costs. She helped me redecorate the rooms my parents had invaded during their attempted break-in, replacing bad memories with good ones. I'd started a foundation with part of the settlement, money helping adult children escape financial abuse. Jasmine ran it with me, her accounting skills now used to help rather than expose. We'd helped dozens of people in our first few months, teaching them to recognize abuse, document it, and escape it. Marcus came into my life through the foundation. A fellow survivor of parental financial abuse, he understood, without explanation, why I sometimes panicked when splitting dinner bills or got anxious about keeping receipts. He was patient and kind, everything Kyle hadn't been able to be when faced with my family drama. He loved me not despite my scars, but with full knowledge of them. "You know what the ironic thing is?" I told him one evening, as we sat on the porch my grandmother had loved. "They were right about one thing. They did teach me valuable lessons. They taught me to document everything, to stand up for myself, to recognize abuse disguised as love. They gave me every tool I needed to defeat them. The restraining order meant I hadn't seen or heard from my parents since the trial. Sometimes late at night, I wondered if they ever felt genuine remorse or if they still saw themselves as victims. Then I remembered it didn't matter. They'd made their choices, and I'd made mine. I kept a photo on my mantle, Grandma Evelyn and me at my college graduation. She'd been the only family there, the only one who came without calculating the cost of gas and time. Next to it sat the court documents dismissing their case, a reminder that I'd won more than money. I'd won my freedom. They demanded all my possessions in court. I often told people who asked about my story. What they got instead was a public accounting of their own greed, a criminal record, and the loss of the only asset that actually mattered, their daughter. They spent 32 years building a case against me, keeping every receipt, documenting every penny. In the end, those very records proved they weren't parents at all. They were just creditors who happened to share my DNA. And like any predatory lender, they eventually got shut down. The greatest inheritance Grandma Evelyn left me wasn't money or property. It was the strength to see my worth beyond someone else's balance sheet. The wisdom to know that love doesn't come with invoices, and the courage to stand up in court and say, "I owe you nothing," to the people who brought me into this world only to present me with a bill for existing. Sometimes, when I help another adult child escape their family's financial abuse, they ask how I found the strength to fight back. I tell them the truth. Our parents taught us to keep records, to document everything, to never forget a debt. They just never realized we'd use those same skills to document their abuse, to keep records of their neglect, to never forget what they'd stolen. They created us in their image, forgetting that mirrors reflect truth, not just the lies we tell ourselves. I was raised by people who saw me as an investment portfolio rather than a daughter, but in the end, their greed became my freedom. Their meticulous records became evidence against them, and their lawsuit became the key that finally unlocked my cage. They took me to court to collect on a debt that existed only in their twisted imagination. What they collected instead was justice served cold with a side of public humiliation and criminal charges. The bailiff reading that list, $243,671.50, that was the sound of my chains breaking. Every penny they'd stolen, every dollar they'd documented, every receipt they'd saved to build their case. It all became evidence of their crimes rather than my debt. They'd played themselves in the most spectacular way possible, and I'd had a front row seat to their destruction. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever dealt with family members who saw you as a financial resource rather than a person? How did you handle it? Drop a comment below and let me know. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about surviving family dysfunction and finding justice. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they don't owe their parents for being born, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from those who only know how to take. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you are not an investment, you are not a debt to be collected, and you deserve love that doesn't come with a price tag. Until next time, stay strong and keep documenting everything. You never know when those records might save your life.